Hello and welcome to this telesummit on feminism as a sustainability tool. I'm Jenny Lamorgan. I'm a social entrepreneur and owner of greenwomanstore.com, where education is a priority for us, and we enjoy creating educational tools like this telesummit on topics important to us as women. And feminism and sustainability are two collective quests that touch every aspect of our lives. Feminism has always brought hope, a lot of hard work, and truth to whatever issue it touches. We will talk today about the important role that feminism plays in real, lasting, and global sustainability in a lot of aspects of our lives. Our goal is to bring you hope and tools for the future and an expanded global reality. And now I'd like to introduce our guest who will talk with us about the connections between gender and the environment. Ursula Miniszewski is the Gender and Environment Program Manager at the Global Greengrants Fund. She's a contributing author of Climate Justice and Women's Rights, a guide to supporting grassroots women's actions, and she is co-coordinator of the Summit on Women and Climate. Ursula has experience working on human rights issues in Africa, Latin America, and Europe. She has also worked with internationally focused nonprofits based here in the United States. Ursula holds an MA in International Studies and a BA in History, and I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. She has a lot to add to our global awareness, certainly, and the whole issue of gender and environment is kind of a mystery to a lot of us. And so she's going to give us some clarity. So welcome, Ursula Miniszewski. Thank you very much for talking with us.
Well, thanks you, Jenny. I really appreciate being here. I appreciate you also including this really important element to the feminism discussion with, climate change becoming an ever increasing reality of our day-to-day lives. I think it's even more important than ever to understand the linkages and connections between gender and environment. So thanks.
Thank you. I know we hear about women being impacted greatly by climate change, but we don't really get the specifics. So I'm glad you're here with us today. So let's begin with talking about the Global Greengrants Fund. The term green grant making it's a powerful term, and it's certainly rare, as is funding for women. So tell us about your good work.
Sure. So Global Greengrants Fund is located in Boulder, Colorado, and we are the leading environmental fund that supports grassroots action on a global scale. So that means we are channeling grants and supporting projects in communities in developing countries primarily that are working to create environmental and social justice. Our model of grant making and support is based on our deeply held belief that local people really know what's best about what they need in order to address the most pressing environmental and social justice challenges that they're facing on a daily basis. So over the past 20 years, we just turned 20 last year, we have channeled over 8,500 grants to groups in 160 countries, totaling $45 million. More recently, under the leadership of Terry Odendahl, the Gender and Environment Program came to be, and the Gender and Environment Program at GGF is committed to integrating women's voices into our grant-making strategies, which means really ensuring that women's voices and their specific needs are taken into consideration when the projects that we fund are chosen. We're making sure that they have a voice in decision-making and whether or not the projects promote women's rights and equality. So our goal with this program is to ensure that half of all of our grants, organizationally wide, go to projects that are either women-led or women-focused. As part of
That's wonderful.
That's our goal. We're at 40% actually right now, so we're not as far away, I think, as we had originally thought we were. I think we started to take, a closer look at our numbers and really start tracking them a little bit more closely. And once we did that, we found out that we are closer to our goal than we had expected, which is great news.
Wow, very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
All right. And can you explain some of the links and connections between gender and the environment? Again, just to give us some clarity on that, between women's rights and protecting and restoring the environment.
Sure. So, you mentioned green grant making in the previous question, and I think that green grant making, or supporting projects related to the environment, is relatively common within the philanthropic community, and separately, so is supporting women's rights, so organizations funding women fighting against domestic violence or reproductive health and these types of things. So separately, I think they're funded, but what's different about the Gender and Environment Program, and I'll go into this a little bit more about when I talk about the links between gender and environment, the unique part about this is that hardly anyone is supporting projects at that really critical intersection between gender and environment. And so I think that we're one of the only grant makers who's actually doing that and making that link for people. And so it's a really exciting time for us. And so in terms of the links, in many developing countries, women's roles are inextricably linked, and more than men, to the environment. And so first of all, let me back up and talk a little bit about what I mean by gender. And I don't want to use the term women and gender interchangeably, because I know that happens frequently as we start to use the term gender more and more within the feminism movement. So the way that I'm speaking about gender refers to the roles and responsibilities, rights, relationships, and identities that are ascribed to women and men within a given society and context, and how these factors affect and influence each other. So when we're talking about gender in the environment, we're really talking about what women's roles mean in relationship to the environment. And so as I was saying, in most developing countries, and especially in rural areas, the women are the ones who they know about the bodies of water that they go to collect, water for their communities and their families. They are the ones using the forest for fuel for cooking. They're using it for medicine. They're going into the forest and collecting plants and herbs for medicine. They are the ones in charge of foraging for food and providing their families and communities with food on a daily basis. And so many women, almost half of all women in developing countries comprise the food producers of the world. And so women are, you can see that they're just absolutely tied to the environment in many, many ways, and so they have a strong interest in protecting, that which sustains their lives and the lives of their families and communities.
And when you say that the gender element is specific to the roles of the women in their communities, then you really do take a different approach depending on the part of the world you're working in.
Absolutely. We really do, and I think we have to, right? Because it's even though we're living in a more globalized and interactive world, there are absolutely unique characteristics about countries, regions, regions within regions, cities, towns, villages, families. So we're absolutely it's absolutely necessary to take into consideration what the term gender means within the context of each of those different scenarios.
All right. And the same with feminism. You know, feminism has a different definition or a different look depending on what part of the world we're talking about. So it's something that we identify ourselves, you know.
Yeah, and feminism, you know, Western feminism doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as feminism does in Latin America. And I know that some of our advisors, our grant-making advisors in Africa have told us that when we use the term gender, it is interpreted primarily as meaning youth.
Interesting. Okay, so it's the language too. It's how we,
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, you certainly have a handle on how things differ around the world with your different. You know, that's really interesting.
We're trying. We're always learning.
I think you do a good job. And you know, both women and Indigenous people are participating now in environment and development strategies for sustainability. And I think in many cases we bring the same relational solutions. You know, we're in relationship with the environment and the water and the earth. And in the U.S. and Canada, Native women are now on the front lines to stop several planned pipelines as well as the ones that are already polluting their treaty lands. How does Green Grants support Indigenous rights, and do these projects also support women's rights?
Absolutely, and I think, again, we need to take into consideration the different roles that Indigenous women have within their communities versus non-Indigenous. So, you know, a lot of Indigenous communities have more of a matriarchal structure, and so while I think that we speak in generalizations a lot, you know, about the developing countries, I think there's absolutely nuances that we need to keep in mind, especially within Indigenous communities. But in terms of Global Greengrants Fund, we absolutely believe that we can learn from Indigenous people wisdom in terms of how to live in harmony with the earth and sustainably. And so over the past 20 years, we've just to give you a sense of how we have supported them, we've supported over 2,000 projects in 95 countries totaling over $11 million. And those are all over the world, primarily in Latin America, because the Indigenous groups tend to be more defined and have a different ethic around activism than in other countries and regions of the world. And so a lot of what we're helping them do is protect their rights to their ancestral land, their traditional livelihoods and ways of life. And, you know, it's just, unfortunately, it's a reality that the increased amount of mining and large infrastructure projects that are happening, especially, for example, in Latin America, you know, it's threatening all of these things, which threatens, you know, Indigenous communities' lives. That's the bottom line. And so it's a big priority for us. In terms of women's rights, so again, we don't want to define necessarily what that means within Indigenous communities. What we do is look to our advisors, our grant-making advisors who are from that region and sometimes from the Indigenous community, and to kind of navigate that relationship and definition of women's rights and what it means for women to take part in decision-making around natural resources. And so in Bolivia, it happens that there's this incredible Indigenous movement that's happening among women. It's the organization is called the Confederation of Indigenous Women of Bolivia, and it's really a movement and that's growing in size and sophistication. It's you know, they've been sustainably using forests for generations, but women there, as in many regions around the world, do not have rights to the land that they're using, and so they're therefore being excluded from decision-making processes around the use of forests. That's on a national, regional and local scale. So in response, the women in Bolivia are mobilizing, and through this confederation and through this movement, they're being trained to become public spokespersons or people for their territories, and are beginning to advocate for their rights and learn really about what rights they have, and then advocate for them, and especially for the rights that directly relate to not only the forest but the land that they are traditionally have the right to. So there's this incredible movement that's really exciting in Bolivia, and we're continuing to. It's comprised of several organizations within that confederation, and we're continuing to support them.
Very good. I know I just heard on NPR yesterday how they're looking toward opening large areas of Mexico up to fracking, and so I think that
yes.
I know. So everything that we're doing here to address the fracking and the damage to the communities and the environment, I think will be useful in other parts of the world as this effort seems to be spreading.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, I know. Can you give us examples of women's leadership and women's solutions being funded and supported that actually stop the destruction of and pollution in communities?
Sure, I'd love to. I don't know if I mentioned this, but one of the things that the Gender and Environment Program comprised of last year was the Summit on Women and Climate that I co-coordinated, that was held in Bali, Indonesia, and it brought approximately 100 funders and local women climate leaders together from 37 different countries to kind of better understand the impacts of climate change on local women's lives and what we as funders can do about it, and what the real needs are, not necessarily what we as funders would prescribe from what we call the global north, but what women on the ground really do need. And so one of our guests that we invited, her name is Mama Leita, and she is from West Timor. And what she did is really lead her community in forcing out some major mining companies that were illegally mining and mining without the consent of the local communities. And so mining industries have been interested in the region where Mama Leita comes from in West Timor for a few decades, and they've been coming out without, like I said, the consent of the local indigenous peoples. And so these communities, these local communities, have started to organize, and they held protests and did different things to try to, refuse the mining companies or prevent them from doing extractive activities in their land. It's their traditional land, it's their ancestral land, it's their forests, and none of the efforts were working. And so what Mama Leita did was basically mobilized all of these different local communities, and we supported with a small grant the communities to get together and really disseminate what had not been working and why, and what could work in terms of, creating a real defense against these mining companies and the activities that they were doing. And so what she did, what was decided at this meeting that we funded, was that because none of these efforts had been successful in the past, they were going to try something totally new. And what they decided, and the women were included in this discussion, they decided that the women would be basically sent to the front lines, only the women. And so Mama Aleta led over 150 women to the site of a couple of the mines, and they sat for a year, the women did, silently weaving every single day, and blocking the mining companies from entering the mines. And finally, after a year, the mining companies really did just give up and left. And
wow.
Yeah, I mean, and they were weaving. They were using the dye from, that they get from the forests. And so it was a protest on a lot of levels, and it was a protest that really kind of reflects a type of protest or resistance that women tend to do more than men, right? It's less public. Mm-hmm. It's, women obviously can do more public and loud and whatever protests, but what they tend to do is organize and kind of do things from behind the scenes. And so this really reflects a powerful tool that women have that does not get recognized. And
a great model. It sounds so much like the women of Liberia. And
exactly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Very. And the Chipko women in the 80s as well.
Absolutely. Hug the tree. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I know the Liberian women made a video that really was used as a development tool around Africa. And so that whole use of video and theater and all of that being used as development tools around the world, I think it's really an amazing time to see these kinds of changes happening. How much fun for you to be in the middle of it all.
Yes. I mean, so inspirational, honestly.
And it sounds like Green Grants is really a feminist and human rights philanthropy, at its finest.
It's interesting. I mean, we started out as primarily focused on environmental justice and, or more, protecting the environment. So what we started to hear from our advisors, though, out in the field was the environment it's not separate from the people that are living in it. So we have to consider social justice as a really integral part of our grant making. And so that's when we kind of, shifted into more focus on social justice and environmental justice.
Right. I think from the outside we see it as environmental issues, but they're experiencing it as human rights and social justice issues. I worked with the American Indian movement in the 80s, and they had already been at the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations for a dozen years. And what I was seeing, because I was working with environmental organizations, what I was seeing was that all of their human rights violations were the result of resource exploitation. And so, that's where I kind of brought that in. And so I think it's really interesting that's been your experience as well.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
It's never just the environment.
Well, no, and especially the environment. I mean, in some of these regions, the environment doesn't just exist in a vacuum. There are like indigenous communities, like I was talking about before, who have been there, since whenever. And so, you can't ignore the fact that there's a people living in total harmony with their environment.
Right, and we hear that in the fracking communities too. We hear about the environmental pollution, but the harm to the social makeup and the individuals and the women in particular is something that we don't hear about, So I want to do a telesummit on fracking.
I
know.
Sounds like that's the next one. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And water issues, and it's all so important out there. Do you have some success stories for us from Africa?
I do. I wanted to share a little bit about a group in Uganda, and let me see if I have information here. And I think we hear more and more about cook stoves, and there are more kind of development organizations focusing on cook stoves, and I think it's really interesting because cook stoves, they're an interesting development tool in relationship to the environment because they're completely cross-cutting. They address gender roles. They address the environment. They address economic livelihoods, and so it's a really interesting topic for us. So in rural Uganda, there's an organization called the Eco Development Foundation, and what they did, they were noticing that the women in the community were really suffering from just health-wise from the polluted air that they were breathing from the open stoves in their homes. And not only is this a health issue for the women, but it's also polluting the air. It's greenhouse gas emissions, and so this foundation that we gave a grant to led a project to promote climate change adaptation and resilience among the women in this village. They held training workshops. They taught the women how to plant trees and where to plant them and what type. They established vegetable gardens, and then they helped implement some innovative stove technologies and taught the women how to essentially build the stoves. And so all of these activities were aimed at increasing the uptake of and limiting the production of carbon dioxide, as well as improving the health of the local women. And over the course of the year, more than 122 women and girls were trained in climate change adaptation mitigation strategies. And so, that in and of itself is great. Other benefits included, I think indirectly this will reduce deforestation in the region. It promotes energy savings and healthy living in the homes of those who are using the energy-efficient stoves. They're called Lorena stoves. And the trainings also provided social marketing skills to promote the safer technologies to other households. So now the women are entrepreneurs, and they're running businesses to manufacture and sell the stoves in neighboring villages. And so they're opening bank accounts, they're applying for loans, household savings in the village have increased, and so in addition to the reduction in local deforestation and improved health of the women, the economic impact that the businesses are having is also really incredible. And so this is one of my favorite stories from Africa, again, because of the kind of cross-cutting elements of cook stoves.
And are you talking about solar stoves?
Yeah, I'm not positive about the exact technology of these specific Lorena stoves, but I'm assuming they're either reduced biomass or solar.
Or solar. I know when I first started Green Woman Store, I really researched trying to find solar stoves for us, and the only ones I could find were manufactured in Africa, and to have them shipped here was, just prohibitive. But I really wanted to work out some kind of an arrangement, so that we could definitely support the women in Africa making the stoves, and then, bring them into our own reality here, it's a really interesting and sustainable way that we can learn to cook as well. So I'm still interested. I'm going to check out Lorena Stoves in Uganda.
Well, and
thank you.
And I mean, if you can imagine, I just read this statistic by a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, who said that open fires in your home, burning open fires in your home is like burning 400 cigarettes per hour.
Right. I know the women have really lung problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a health issue. Wow.
But you can
all right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You can see how what?
Oh, you can see how, health of women's health is clearly related to the environment and economic alternatives and so on. And so it's just so imperative that the environment be part of the entire picture of women's rights and gender within development.
Right, and that's where the gender piece comes in, because it's women's roles to do the cooking.
Exactly.
And so they're the ones that are experiencing the really extreme health issues.
Right.
All right. So that's I've always been interested in that piece. So, and I know you have a favorite story from Colombia.
I do. It's a favorite of mine just because I'm also familiar with Colombia, and it's from the Tumaco region of Colombia, which is the southwest coast, and it's where a lot of poor and marginalized communities, mostly Colombians of African descent, are living, and this region in particular, Tumaco, has been a site of extreme violence in terms of the civil war over the last couple of decades and drug trafficking. So along the coast there are these incredible mangroves, and what drug traffickers were doing was hiding drugs, massive amounts of drugs, dead bodies in the mangroves, because the mangroves get really tangly and they're kind of swampy, and it's really easy to hide basically things there. I don't know if you've ever been to a mangrove, but and so this community in the Tumaco region, the women in this community were using the mangroves as a source of livelihood and food for their families, and harvesting shellfish in the mangroves. The mangroves are incredible ecosystems, and so many different types of sea life can be found within them, and so the women were starting to get attacked. They were being raped. It became too dangerous for them to collect shellfish anymore in these mangroves. And not only was there violence, but also there had been oil spills and industrial contamination that had happened just a little bit north up the coast that was impacting the health of the mangroves also. So the women basically had lost their source of livelihood and a source of food for their families, and they formed an organization called the Women's Way Corporation. And you were talking about how theater and video can really impact and be used as a tool of development, and these women decided that the best way to kind of scare off the drug traffickers and highlight the intense pollution and contamination that was happening up the coast was to make it a national issue. And so the Women's Way Corporation created a national media campaign with a grant that we gave them. And you have to keep in mind these grants are usually, they range from about $1,500 to maybe $8,000. So they're normally under $10,000, and these groups are doing incredible things with a very small amount of money. And so the women developed an entire campaign that they brought to the Capitol, and they brought diplomats and representatives they brought them physically out to their village and showed them what was happening and highlighted, and showed them the contamination and it scared away the drug traffickers. I don't know what's happened with the contamination, but it's definitely become a place now where women are slowly returning to their traditional sources of livelihoods. And so it's a really important case that highlights, political, social, environmental, all of these different angles that women are addressing in their daily lives.
And I think it also highlights the need for travel money, for the women to get to places where there are gatherings addressing these issues. And then in this case, it was certainly to bring those legislators to their land. So I think travel money and funding for travel money for women to travel is something that is, it just makes things happen. So that's a really important thing that y'all are doing.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because it's often not the sexiest type of grant to make or funding to provide. You don't necessarily see major impacts or the type of impact you might want to see in the shorter term when you're providing things like travel money. However, it's critical to achieve some of the longer term goals, and that's actually one of the things that we absolutely do highlight and encourage others in the philanthropic community to support because there's just not enough of it. And also women, one of the things that we learned at the summit last summer was that networking among women and women from different communities and regions and getting together just for conferences and train the trainer and, educational sessions with each other. This is how women operate, and they're relational based, and they are incredibly effective when they are working amongst other women. I mean, other men also, but they work. I guess what am I trying to say? They work together in a different way than men do, and I think that it's important to remember that as grant makers, especially as grant makers to women, which then just reinforces, the travel funding, the significance of travel funding.
Mm-hmm. And that's the way the NGOs work as well. That's the way the United Nations works. I mean, the NGOs that work with the UN, it just matters who gets there.
Exactly.
And the people who get there are the ones that affect these strategies that go up to either the national level or the UN level or whatever, that trickle down in a good way.
Exactly.
So it's all about who gets there. know, and so it's nice to hear that you have that awareness as well, because that was certainly that was my experience, and I think it's a wonderful way that you make an impact. And then talking about women being able to gather in their among women, because they're not intimidated then,
right.
And they are able to think more clearly. There's more clarity, there's more strength, because they're not bouncing off of things that they've had happen to them, and they're not intimidated. Right. They can come out of those meetings then with stronger strategies, and women's space is just important around the world. It's certainly how the human race developed through these matriarchal societies. You know, that's how humans developed. So, you know, we need that to continue, and we need to support it. And thank you very much for funding that, because that's an important piece.
Yes.
All right. So let's move to India. I know you have projects in India. And do you have any examples of women farmers in India?
We do. So women farmers in India are already doing a lot of seed saving, and this is really adaptation, climate adaptation. This is a strategy. In terms of the mitigation, it's hard to. Sometimes there's a distinction between mitigation and adaptation. I think a lot of the projects that we support could fall under adaptation, because it's, you know, women adapting to the different, especially the women farmers adapting to the different climate, you know, tendencies and the severe weather. But mitigation is also a really important aspect, and I think that comes through more with, you know, in terms of the women protecting the forests, right? And so that's a clear reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And so this is, you know, I spoke a little bit about forests already, and I'd like to talk a little bit now more about the seeds and really the adaptation and the role of women in this in Asia. And this is actually a story from Bangladesh and eastern India, from the Sundarbans, and it's the largest coastal mangrove forest in the world. Another mangrove story. Mm-hmm. Mangroves are just so incredibly important. They're major carbon sinks also, and so they're just critical to maintain. But women and children in this region suffer from really high rates of malnutrition, and female farmers really struggle to access information about climate change adaptation techniques that are critical to the survival of their crops. And so with the support of a grant from Global Greengrants Fund, this organization in India provided training workshops focused on literacy, food security, and climate change for 20 local women's groups in this region. And women planted more than 150 gardens and built 2 seed banks on raised platforms for safe seed storage, which is interesting because it's to protect against the floods that are increasing in severity because of climate change. And so they also learned how to gather and store rainwater and to create floating nurseries as well in case of flooding. So, you know, now a lot of the women feel more secure about the health and their well-being and the well-being of their families and communities. And so, and this is just one way this is just one way that women can adapt to climate change. However, you know, one of the reasons why literacy was included in this project is because so few women have access to literacy or a formal education, that this is one of the problems and direct relationships between climate change and women, is that they don't have access to the information about the impacts of climate change and how the impacts, you know, they see it indirectly. They can tell that their crops are being impacted by the different climate or weather patterns, right? But they don't necessarily know how to change their crops, or, you know, what to do in response to this these more varied weather patterns. And And so the access to information and access to decision-making processes around regional plans for addressing this varied weather is really important for women. And so I think that's a really key part of some of these projects is really just providing them, whether it means literacy or just basic information about how climate change is impacting their daily lives.
And bringing in scientists from developed countries isn't the solution either, because oftentimes our solutions don't work in other cultures or other environments. So
right. A lot of times it goes back to what we were just talking about in terms of bringing women together. So a lot of women, a group I visited in Tanzania talked about how they learned a lot of what they were doing with drying food and changing their crops and from a neighboring women's group. And
oh, wonderful!
We had provided them with the funding to get that training from this other women's group in a neighboring region. So a lot of times, it can just be within their region that they can get this information.
Mm-hmm. And, just the small climate differences between, 25, 30, 50 miles is important to know about. Mm-hmm. And so by bringing in knowledgeable people that have already walked through it and figured out the answers from really local, nearby communities, that's hugely important. That's something that that's an awareness that you have at Green Grants that a lot of NGOs working, at the UN level don't have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah. So y'all are really, you've really got an expanded awareness of, and I think it comes from working with and empowering the people at the grassroots.
Right. Exactly.
And listening to them. Yeah. And listening to what they have to say.
Yeah, and that is all, it's absolutely all through our network of over 150 grant-making advisors on the ground, and they're volunteers. And so, I don't think, without their knowledge, we wouldn't be able to make the types of impactful and appropriate grants and responsive that we do.
And so tell us a little bit more about the advisors on the ground, because those are really the sustainability experts.
Yes. Yeah, and so they are, so we have 15 regional grant-making advisory boards, and so there are 15 of them located throughout the world. We have 2 thematic boards. One is called the Next Generation Climate Board, that gives grants promoting youth leadership within climate issues. And then the other thematic group is the IFI advisory group, which is the International Financial Institutions Group, that provides grants to groups who are really monitoring the types of projects that major IFIs are funding, so World Bank projects and things like that, to make sure that the people on the ground are benefiting from it rather than being harmed from it. So, so the regional boards, so all of the boards are made up of about 5 to 7 people, and they're all of them are from the environmental and social justice movements within their region. And they are experts in many different things, and they range from being professors to heads of their own NGOs, to lawyers. I mean, it really runs the gamut, but they all have had experience in networks in the region within the environmental and social justice movements so that they know the groups that are out there that need the small grant funding the most. They're familiar with them, they've worked with them, and so they're really the eyes and ears on the ground.
That's really wonderful. That's really wonderful because you're empowering those people with the real knowledge. That's wonderful. All right, well, we're running toward the end of the interview, and I want to get in a little bit about island nations and why it's critical that we get resources to people in those parts of the world. They're being the hardest hit by climate change.
Sure. So I have a statistic here that as many as 1 billion people worldwide live within 20 meters of the current mean sea level. And I think that clearly, climate change and the relationship between climate change and rising sea levels is one of the most kind of direct relationships that people see and hear about. And another one of the guests that we invited to the summit last summer was a woman named Ursula Miniszewski, and she started an organization to basically in response to the fact that the island that her and her community are living on is literally drowning, and due to rising sea levels. So she lives on Papua New Guinea's Cataract Atoll, and it's a small island in Papua New Guinea, and it was basically split into two, and each one now is being submerged, and so not only are they losing their land, literally, the salinization of the land and the salt water from the oceans is impacting their fertile soil, and they're traditionally farmers, and they're no longer able to farm on the land. And so she's led basically this organization and her community of just a few thousand people to higher ground, and they have had to relocate. They have had to relocate, and relocation doesn't just mean, picking up and taking off. It means some of the people, a lot of the elderly people want to stay, and she spends a lot of time trying to convince them to go because of their own safety and so that they don't starve. They deal with assimilation issues with the current communities in the place where they're relocating. So cultural and traditional differences. They're dealing with trying to build homes for these families that have had to relocate. And so she and this organization are facing a lot of challenges in this relocation process and have had hardly any support from their government. And so she's been a really active advocate for her community and travels a lot, advocating for support of primarily homes being built for these families that have needed to be relocated. And so this is unfortunately not an uncommon circumstance. They're called climate refugees, which is becoming a more kind of prevalent term within the climate change discourse, and it's also a real lesson in the need on the ground for not huge grants, not a ton of funding, but support in helping these families start new businesses, create, research new crops to grow in this new region where they live, because everything's different for them now. And the governments aren't acknowledging it, and so, who else do they have?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think the comment that you just made about using funds and resources in the proper way that really has some impact on the communities, I think that's so important, because we've seen so much of our foreign aid just disappeared. Nobody knows where it went, and you all seem to really have a handle on using your money wisely. Just briefly, can you tell us about some of the more pressing issues that Green Grants is looking at funding this coming year?
Sure. One of the primary things this year, I think gender and climate, it will continue as a pressing issue. But another thing that's come up is youth and climate, and that's really, our next generation climate board is only a couple of years old, and they have already given out 24 grants for over $100,000, totaling over $100,000 in 17 countries. There's a real need to cultivate youth climate leaders in developing countries. 90% of youth ages 15 to 24 live in developing countries, and we're seeing that climate change has the most severe negative impacts on developing countries, and so there's an absolute need for cultivating these leaders and youth within these countries who are really paying attention to the survival of their communities.
And so many of our solutions are coming out of the youth community. Just remarkable solutions that are solving problems we didn't think we had any. Yeah. Very important. That's really important work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And how can we get folks more involved and contribute to the success stories like the ones that you've shared with us today and the programs and projects that are still waiting to be funded? How can we join the Green Grants community?
Well, the primary and first way you can join is to donate. Your dollars go so much further, I think, we know, with our model of grant making. And so there are different options and ways you can donate and benefits that you can receive. And so if you just go to our website, there's really easy ways of donating there. I would love it if people would participate in this conversation about gender and climate change. We are learning still. Like I said, we love learning from other people about what they're doing. You can always participate in the conversation at #WomenInClimate. And they can share the report that we just came out with. It's Climate Justice and Women's Rights, a guide to supporting grassroots women's action. And you can download it for free at womeninclimate.org. And, please tell your friends and family and communities about it.
Very good, and we'll put some links up for that report as well. And you are just in the middle of so much good work being done, a lot of struggle, but good things happening every day. I would think that you're hopeful for the future. Are you optimistic, Ursula?
I am. I have the good fortune of working at an organization where we hear a lot about the bad things, but we get to hear so much about the good things that are happening to combat those bad things. And so on a broader level, I see the impact of our smaller grants, and it's absolutely inspirational. But on a more personal level, I got to stay in a tent with Ursula Rakova from Papua New Guinea, the woman I was just talking to you about, and we just had the best time, and she had an incredible sense of humor, and we were surrounded by, we had all of these women there at the summit who were resource rights defenders who had been hunted down by corporations and governments and attacked, and you know, Ursula's trying to relocate thousands of people, and one night we had a dance party, and all of these women were dancing and laughing, and I just think that through, you know, the laughter and the dancing, I mean, I think that this type of resilience that I saw in them not only inspires me, but gives me hope for the future, whatever it's going to bring.
Wow, that's a beautiful way to close the interview. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we close?
No, I think I covered a lot.
You did cover a lot, and you gave us so many good stories.
Thank you.
I think we never hear enough about island nations. You know, we just don't hear enough. We know it's happening, but it's kind of outside the scope of our awareness. And so hearing the stories of what the women and the communities are actually going through was very helpful. Thank you again, Ursula Miniszewski, Gender and Environment Program Manager at Global Greengrants Fund, for expanding our global reality and definitely bringing us such wonderful stories and good news of changes coming for the future. Thank you, Ursula.
Thank you so much.
And you can learn more about Ursula's work at greengrants.org. That's greengrants.org. And we have a wonderful link to the Climate Justice and Women's Rights, a guide to supporting grassroots women's action at womenandclimate.org. That's women, A-N-D, climate.org. And we have a link to an article in The Guardian about women on the front lines of disease, malnutrition, and loss of income due to climate change. These women are at the grassroots, and they are coming up with concrete solutions in their communities, from the rainforests of Guatemala to the islands of Papua New Guinea, as their rural communities face extreme weather and new cycles of drought and flooding. Despite leading some of the boldest and most successful climate projects, they receive little attention and scant backing from typical funders. I have to tell you that the work that Green Grants is doing is rare and it's new. And please check out their website, follow their work, get involved. They need us to be informed and to participate as part of the solution. And we can all be glad that there's such an effective organization supporting women and their communities around the world. So thank you again, Ursula Miniszewski, for taking on gender and environment as your career. And thank you for listening in. We hope we have informed and inspired you in many ways. And we hope that you will catch more of the interviews in this series on feminism and sustainability, as well as our other podcast series on issues important to us as women. And please share these interviews with your family and friends. You never know who you may be inspiring. No matter what your description or experience of feminism is, we hope to have heightened your understanding of feminism's important role in all aspects of sustainability, and renewed and strengthened your resolve to build alliances for the future. For it is clear that none of us are really alone. Keep listening, and bye for now.